Okay, that's me. I guess that means I should start. Welcome, everyone, to this session. It's still early on the first day of the World Water Week, but it's great to see that so many are here already, joining us on a Sunday morning, a Sunday that promises to be very exciting. Lots of exciting sessions on transboundary issues happening today. And I'm particularly excited that in this specific session, we're addressing a topic that usually doesn't get that much attention, right? Usually when we talk about water, water conflict, water cooperation, water diplomacy, it's a lot about who gets how much, you get more than I get, so it's a lot about water allocation, water quantity, and as a consequence, often also a lot about water conflict around that. Water quality, on the other hand, is less frequently, less often covered, but interestingly, it's also surrounded by its own set of assumptions that water quality, that's something that countries cooperate over anyway, that's something that's somehow happening, it's not as contentious, it's not as problematic as water allocation, water quantity, but we'll hear in this session whether that's actually the case or not. And I think another important question that at least I believe is still insufficiently covered is the question of whether all that cooperation around water quality that indeed we're seeing, and you'll hear that from some of the keynote speakers, whether that's actually leading to improved water quality. So are we actually harvesting the benefits that we're aiming for when we're establishing transboundary water cooperation agreements? And if that is the case, why are we still seeing so many challenges? Just a week ago in the news, I've seen again that in the Oder River, which is shared by Germany and Poland, we're facing the same challenges that we faced the last summers, which is dying fish populations due to probably a mix of increasing water temperature, pollution, saline water. We're seeing that other basins increasingly struggle with water quality challenges. So is all the cooperation that seems to be out there actually beneficial? And I think that's another interesting dimension that this session will cover, is this cooperation that seems to be functioning or seems to be maybe, that's the question, less contested than other issues of transboundary water cooperation, is that an issue that lends itself to foster future cooperation? Can indeed countries that cooperate over water quality expand their cooperation and address other more contentious issues? We've seen that in the Rhine, for example, where cooperation started very narrowly focusing on certain types of pollutants, now other things from hydromorphological alterations to climate change and so on are being addressed. We're also seeing that in the South Caucasus, for example, there are first discussions emerging whether Azerbaijan and Armenia, not necessarily known for the best friends, can actually start cooperation over water quality. So I think these are a lot of interesting questions that this session tackles. I'm afraid 1.5 hours is quite short to do this. So this session is also a starting point of a discussion. It's an invitation to all of you to engage more in this topic, look at water quality in a comprehensive sense, think of it across sectors, think of it across people, across groups, including those affected by water quality challenges, but also really use this as an invitation to think about it from the source really into the sea. And with that, again, on behalf of all the co-conveners, I'd like to welcome you to this session, and I'd like to hand over to Julien Favier from the UNECE Water Convention, also an alumni of our IHE Young Water Diplomats program, who will take you through the session. Julien.
So good morning all, and thank you very much, Susan, for this great introductory words and for setting the stage. So as Susan said, I'm Julien Favier from the Water Convention Secretariat based in Geneva. And before we delve into our discussion today, just 2 words about the Water Convention and water quality. I will be very short. So just to remind everyone that the Water Convention is an instrument, a legal instrument that aims at fostering transboundary cooperation. So many people just stop there, but you should we should all keep in mind that water quality and the protection of ecosystems is part of the Water Convention, and in fact, it's one of the key pillars of these legal instruments. And also, as part of our institutional work, we are currently preparing and working on a guidance note for the implementation of source-to-sea management in transboundary basins. So that's very much the topic of today, and this will be released, should be released at least during the UN Ocean Conference in Nice in June 2025. So just to frame also what's the role of the Water Convention in all this. And now I think we can start with our keynote speeches. We will have three distinguished speakers this morning. One of them is online, and she is the first of the speakers. So Nina, I hope you can hear us, sorry, and that we can hear you. But in any case, I will just say a few words about Nina. So Nina Hazaka is working for UNEP. She has over 15 years of experience working in water management, obviously, but also climate change adaptation and nature-based solutions. So she's a seasoned professional. She has worked on and with a variety of organizations, including the private sector, UN organizations, and others. And she's now based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I think she's live from Nairobi. And she's currently leading the UNEP-convened World Water Quality Alliance. And the topic of today of our presentation is around fostering cooperation to help overcome the water quality data gap in transboundary settings. And I think I will stop here. We will take Nina's intervention and then the two following ones, and then we will have some time for a Q&A session. So if you have questions, please keep them in mind. And now I hand over to Nina if everything works well. Otherwise, I can sing, but I'm not a very good singer, so I will save this.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, brilliant. Good morning, everyone, and hello from the Southern Hemisphere. I'm very, very sad not to be there in person today, but thank you so much for the opportunity to present also virtually. I do hope my slides are up on the screen. Otherwise, I can kind of start. Let me start, just for the sake of time, start talking about water quality. So the subject of my water quality in transboundary settings, there we go. And the topic of my presentation today will be fostering cooperation to help overcome the water quality data gap in transboundary settings. So as you know, water quality, and I don't think I need to explain it to this audience, is inherently linked to health, environment, social and economic objectives and activities, and indeed to all the SDG targets and goals. Transboundary rivers, lakes and aquifers actually account for over half, so 60% of the world's freshwater flows. And these are faced by pollution from nutrients and chemicals, wastewater, and emerging contaminants, which we well know about now, such as plastics, endocrine disruptors, etc. So a lot of challenges to the water quality globally, and especially in transboundary settings that can travel. These are pollutants that can travel long distances with direct impacts to health of humans and also ecosystems. And of course, one thing to keep in mind, especially linked to the introduction of Suzanne, is that water quality also links to and can further aggravate water scarcity with knock-on kind of social and environmental impacts. I mean, we can talk about overall water quantity, but in the case that the water available, even if there is water available that is not of sufficient quality or where you cannot measure the quality, in the end, this actually means the same, that there is not enough clean water. So you can talk about clean water scarcity as well. So UNEP is custodian of 3 SDG 6 indicators, and among them is indicator 6.3.2, which is the proportion of water bodies with good ambient water quality. I believe you can see on the screen now a snapshot from the portal sdg632hub.org, which showcases the latest results from the 3rd data drive undertaken last year. And in fact, we do have the latest progress report on this indicator, which is about to come out. It will be coming out this Wednesday in Stockholm, so do stay tuned for that as well. But what we know, what you can see from the map there, and what we know from other databases such as GEMSTAT, is that there's a big gap in water quality data reported worldwide and reported openly, again, as measured through this indicator, and also other means. So there's a critical need to improve water quality monitoring at all levels, sub-regional, regional, national, local, and really to help countries access solutions and methodologies for measuring the ambient water quality on different levels. And again, just on a global context, the importance of transboundary cooperation is recognized in several of the UN Environment Assembly resolutions. For instance, that call on member states, and these are resolutions that have been adopted by all UN member states. So there's clearly global recognition of this. So just to say a few more words about this map before I move on. Significant progress has been made since the first data drive in 2017 and 2020. We've moved from about 80 countries in 2020 to just over 120 countries reporting now on the indicator 632. But of course, this is not nearly enough countries, but also even hiding beneath even the colors that are on there on that map on the countries that have reported, there is a data gap hiding, because what we know is that there was approximately 2 million water quality data points collected across all those countries who reported. However, the poorest half of these countries, so half of the countries that reported on 632, contributed less than 3% of this total, meaning about 60,000 data points. So we have big water quality gaps even in those countries. So again, also, even while this is reporting on a national level, this does reflect also on those transboundary contexts where you see that there isn't always the capacity to even start collecting that data on water quality and have the picture of what is the quality of the water that is flowing from one country to another, or being or present in lakes or rivers or aquifers. And again, this represents about 4.4 billion people when you look at this number of countries. So the population of 4.4 billion people. And again, another point to note is that looking at the number of monitoring values, these were measured from lakes, groundwaters, and rivers. So there's much fewer data points from lakes and groundwaters than for rivers. So again, big gap there. And let me go to the other, next slide, please. And I'll just very briefly present a project that we're working on, which is Earth Observation Pathways. So in the World Water Quality Alliance, we are convening different actors to come up with solutions for how to improve water quality monitoring. And again, this is trying to use Earth observation with our partners, University of Stirling, GeoAquaWatch, and a bunch of other partners and experts to help deliver enhanced SDG indicator 632 monitoring, with using the Lake Tanganyika as a pilot area, which has a scarcity of water quality data. You can see it's bordered by Burundi, Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zambia. Next slide, please. And one more slide. And again, you can see here, this is a transboundary water body where what we organized, we started through online discussions. Basically, the challenge here was that there was very little data. The SDG focal points, for instance, hadn't met each other. There was also a language barrier, some English-speaking colleagues, some French-speaking colleagues, and lack of awareness and trust in Earth observations. So even despite quite a tight budget, we had many, again, we were able to bring together the focal points online. We managed to use some technology, direct translation technology, to resolve the language issues. And this really, what we saw is this provided an opening for a discussion on water quality issues. Some of the focal points had never met each other. So again, this was kind of demonstrating a way for how to open up a discussion on water quality and get them to exchange, get them to compare their country's SDG 632 status and reporting, and there was a very strong commitment when explaining Earth observation. There was a very strong positive response as a means to willingness to use and trust in this information, and a direct request to develop further capacity building on the topic that would benefit the whole lake in cooperation with other projects. So again, if I jump to the last slide, I will wrap up. We have a few other examples from the MARA on the use of citizen science, use of transboundary monitoring of plastics. I won't go into them now, but again, I really want to emphasize that there's a clear need to fill the water quality monitoring gap. it's imperative to work with all levels of society, community groups, those SDG focal points, national ministries, even up to the UNRC, the UN country teams, to coordinate, and with, of course, bilateral international donors. And that water quality in the transboundary setting can really be used as an entry point for discussion and cooperation within those existing or developed under the frameworks under development. Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully this has provided some brief examples, and do reach out to us for more. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nina. That was a very interesting presentation. Great for setting the ground. Great also to understand that one of the remaining challenges is really about reporting on water quality across borders and the gaps that exist. And we know that one of the solutions to that is more cooperation. And I think that makes a good transition with the next speaker, Alisa from IHE Delft. So before she jumps on the stage, a few words about Alisa. So she is a doctoral candidate with the IHE Delft Institute in the Netherlands, sorry. And she is particularly working on water conflicts, cooperation, and diplomacy. And her research focuses on the multiscalar relationships between water quality, as we said, conflict, cooperation, and environmental justice in transboundary basins, with both global analysis and more local ones with comparisons. She also supports the Institute's Water Diplomacy and Water Peace and Security Initiative, and prior to that, Alisa was working as an environmental engineer. So without further ado, Alisa, the floor is yours.
For the kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining here today. It's my pleasure, as Julian mentioned, to really build off that cooperation that Nina was highlighting over a collection of monitoring data and explore what that means as well and how we build it further on cooperation between states. So I just want to reiterate that transboundary basins are an important source of global freshwater. There are 313 basins distributed globally, which house over half of the world's population. And these basins are not immune to those ambient water quality impacts that Nina was highlighting. In particular, the Transboundary Water Assessment Program in 2016 identified that 80% of transboundary rivers are considered severely affected by nutrients and pathogens alone. So that is not considering those other contaminants and other water quality pressures that exist. And this can place a lot of pressure on the basin communities that rely on the water resource, but as well as the relationship between states. And we've seen incidences where water quality has contributed to domestic and international tensions. However, at the same time, it does present, as Susanna very nicely highlighted in her opening remarks, an opportunity to build cooperation and to really support relationships between states. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, especially in the context of institutionalized forms of cooperation, which are transboundary agreements. Thanks to the work of the Transboundary Freshwater Diplomacy Database team, many of whom are present in the room right now, we're able to look at the status and trends of transboundary water agreements throughout the globe. And from our research on water quality, which incorporates the latest data and the latest update, we have some preliminary findings. In particular, when we look at the transboundary agreements that address water quality as a primary focus area, so the percent of overall agreements, and that's that green line on the map here, and then as well, when we expand that to include agreements that maybe don't have water quality as a focus area, but still address water quality, so the orange line here, we can see that over time, the percentage in which water quality has been considered in agreements has increased in general. You can see that's not quite the trend in the last 4 years, but that's primarily a relic of that only 3 agreements have been signed and analyzed for that time period. And so this is showing increased attention to water quality that we further see, and I know it's a bit faint, but in the bar chart in the back, where you can see the overall agreements that address water quality, and we see a particular increase in the 1990s and beyond, paralleling a push for greater water cooperation globally, but as well growing awareness of water quality impacts. Now, when we think about that, how it's spatially distributed, you can see that the geographic range of basins that have at least one water quality agreement has increased over time. And again, when we expand that to include those agreements that address water quality in any way, we have a coverage of approximately 53% of all of our transboundary basins. So a little over half of transboundary basins have an agreement that addresses water quality. And this distribution doesn't vary substantially between continents, as you can see in the green below, with ranging between about 39% and 65% of all transboundary basins in a continent having an agreement. And this is great to see this growing cooperation that is occurring in numbers, but then also geographically. But what does it mean? When we look into the agreements a little bit more to understand how they address water quality, we can see that there's a big range. In some agreements, there might be a single sentence that expresses the country's desire to maintain good water quality, whereas others have a bit more substantive measures, like the development of infrastructure projects, or joint monitoring, or even establishing contaminant thresholds. And so when we look at all the agreements, we can see that a little less than half have these substantive measures that in literature are proposed to be effective in really addressing water quality. And while this is nice to see, of course, it's not something that we can conclude because in part it hasn't been fully tested, but also because an agreement is a starting point. And while you can have great information and great progress on paper, it really depends how it is implemented and who implements this with parties and international bodies like river basin organizations that we'll hear from later today. However, it does show promise in really starting to create foundations to address degradation. The other side of this is looking not only at how this cooperation of agreements can affect water quality, but how it can further support relationships between countries. When we're looking at the patterns of agreements that we saw for water quality, a couple of interesting trends emerged. The first of which is that water quality was included in one of the initial agreements for 88 of our transboundary basins, suggesting that it could be a beneficial entry point to really building cooperation over water resources that could be explored a bit further. In addition, in those 88 basins where water quality was included in the initial agreements, it was followed by, 81% of those basins, it was followed by a subsequent agreement, showing that from that agreement, countries saw the value in continuing cooperation and potentially even expanding it. And finally, when we look at those provisions over time, so again, it's a bit of a complicated bar chart, but we're looking at the percentages of provisions in water quality related agreements over the decades. We can see that they've been maintained, suggesting that throughout this time period we've been looking at, there's consistent political will to concretely address water quality, at least in the codification of agreements between countries. And so all of this lets us know that water quality agreements present a really promising opportunity to both address water quality degradation and as well to both develop and maintain cooperation between basin states. However, this doesn't tell us how it's implemented, again, because water quality is a starting point. So it's the manner in which it's implemented that determines the extent to which it addresses water quality in freshwater and marine systems, as well as the human and water security of our basin communities. So what we can do is take these promising opportunities and this promising foundation and on it build best practices to really reap the gains of water quality related cooperation. And I'm thrilled that we'll be exploring that later in this panel today. I want to thank you all.
So thank you very much, Alisa, for this very interesting presentation. And so now we've looked a lot at the transboundary level, at cooperation on water quality at that level. And I think now we missed a bit the source-to-sea dimension, and that's the very topic of the next presentation by Ruth Matthews from SEWI. So a few words about Ruth before we start. She leads the source-to-sea program at SEWI, at the Stockholm International Water Institute, and she's the coordinator of the action platform for source-to-sea management, which is a network of organizations committed to promoting, building, commitment for, and implementing source-to-sea actions. So it's really the topic of the presentation, and she's a real expert in this field. She has nearly 3 decades experience working in the interface between land, freshwater, coastal, and the marine environment, and she has led source-to-sea projects in various countries across the world, where she has engaged a wide range of stakeholders in addressing source-to-sea challenges. And now she will talk to us about source-to-sea perspective in water quality cooperation. And the floor is yours, Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and also for the the conversation that we've already kicked off here. I think this has been already a very interesting event, and I have to say it's been one that I've been very excited about coming forward, because I think this is really critical in terms of our ability to understand how pollution flows within transboundary basins, and how transboundary basins do not end at the coast, but actually go on through into the ocean. And so just so that we all are on the same page with what is a source-to-sea system, it includes the land, the freshwater, whether that's lakes, rivers, or aquifers, the coastal area, deltas, and nearshore areas, and out into the marine environment. And what's really important to recognize here is that the impacts of activities, we generally think about moving from upstream to downstream, but they can also flow back upstream. So as coastal and marine areas are degraded, that can have impacts to upstream actors. The other thing, the flip side of that, is the benefits of healthy ecosystems also flow both downstream and upstream. And I think this is a real core of what we want to understand about transboundary cooperation, is that as we work in the area of water quality, that we are really wanting to recognize these upstream and downstream connections, both in terms of impacts, but also in terms of the benefits that we get when we take good action. And just to say that we are focusing on pollution here, but source-to-sea systems are connected through other key flows, is what we call them. And so that's water and biota, it's sediment, it's the built environment, and essentially these ecosystem services that if we maintain the key flows in a healthy state, then we reap the rewards of those ecosystem services. And so pollution can be one area that we focus on, but it connects to these other parts of the source-to-sea system, the way the source-to-sea system is connected. And so that can also play into transboundary cooperation for water quality by understanding these linkages between pollution and these other key flows. Unfortunately, the situation that we have in many places, and the majority of places, is that governance is fragmented across the source-to-sea system. It can be that there are different authorities responsible for different aspects of what's happening on land, whether it's forestry or agriculture or energy production or urban areas. There can be different authorities responsible for different parts of the freshwater ecosystem. Same for the marine environment and the coastal areas. And so even within each one of these segments, there can be a lot of fragmentation in terms of governance. And then across these segments, that also can be very fragmented. And this becomes a very important issue when we're thinking about transboundary cooperation, because then the question is, who needs to be at the table? If we are truly to address water quality across the source-to-sea continuum, we need to bring in all of those actors across those different authorities, across the different interest parties, both with the public and the private sector and civil society, to be in the conversations together. And I think this is something that maybe does not happen that frequently with transboundary cooperation, in terms of really bringing together all of these different actors. But this is what is core to source-to-sea management, is to have that cross-sectoral coordination, to have the different authorities and actors and interested parties, stakeholders, talking together about how to solve this, the issues of water quality degradation, and to engender that upstream, downstream downstream cooperation based on that understanding that both impacts and benefits go both downstream and upstream. And so a healthy nearshore area, healthy coastal area, a healthy marine area can be very important to the well-being of those who live upstream of those areas. So some of the key points that I would like to leave you with is that in a source-to-sea approach to transboundary cooperation, we'd be really looking for those mutual benefits that will appear across the entire source-to-sea continuum. That this could then also reduce the pressures for migration because ecosystem services have been degraded, which means that we can also find opportunities by strengthening this cross-sectoral coordination and the upstream-downstream cooperation, and perhaps reduce conflict because of this understanding of the relationships across the source-to-sea system. And just to leave you, I'm the coordinator for the source-to-sea platform. It is a multi-stakeholder platform. You are welcome to contact me or look at our website. We welcome new organizations who are interested in this holistic management of the source-to-sea system, and I hope that you find our resources valuable. Thank you, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
So, yeah, thank you very much, Ruth, for this presentation. I think very interesting as well. It's very interesting to see how all this is interlinked, and the connection and the fact that ecosystems, and especially source-to-sea, the dimension is really, everything is connected. So I think that's quite important. So now we've reached the end of the session. So we have a time for Q&A. I don't know if someone can confirm how long we have, but it was expected to be around 10 minutes. So if you have any question, and of course, maybe a bit less than 10 minutes. But yeah, if you have questions, our speakers are here, ready, and also online, and Nina is with us. So do not hesitate to fire any question you may have. Yeah, I see a gentleman down there. Do we have a mic? Yeah. So.
I'm Prasad Pant from ZDHC Foundation. We are based in Amsterdam, and we are an organization in zero discharge of hazardous chemicals from textile and leather facilities. My question is that, do we have a international framework on what parameters are included when we talk about water quality? Or is it just pathogens and nutrients, or are there other parameters included when we say water quality?
So, yeah, thank you very much for your question. Just to say, we have only 3 minutes at the end of the day, so we will be brief and concise. So I don't know if anyone is volunteering to take the question. Just we take maybe one other question and we answer, or what do you think? Yeah. And I see a hand down there, yeah.
Ahmed Abu Saud from UNDP. Thank you for this nice presentations. My question is our comment related to the monitoring programs for water quality, especially for developing countries. It's expensive. It needs a lot of resources that is not available in these countries, and usually it is donor-driven projects. When the project ends, this kind of programs die. So we need to know how to sustain these monitoring programs. Also, monitoring by itself is not enough. Yes, we know where the hotspots, but in these countries, you don't know what to do about this. So I think, because I was a governmental officials before I joined UNDP, so I was the head of the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency for 4 years. So we suffered from, we know the hotspots, but we don't have enough resources to tackle these issues. So I think we have to link the monitoring systems to incentive and investment programs that if you have a good monitoring system and you have reliable water quality, the donors should support these countries to tackle these issues and close the loop on water quality management. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, sir. And so I think we will now answer these questions. For the first question about a global framework on water quality, and I don't know if someone is volunteering in the room or if Nina, you're volunteering online. Can you hear us, Nina?
Maybe I could just say one thing in kind of the in that territory, which is what we've seen working in a source-to-sea framework is that even the indicators that are being used to monitor water quality in different parts of the source-to-sea system are not the same, and so no, I don't think there is a global framework for water quality and specific indicators. Although Nina would be much better to answer that. But just to say, these are some of the issues that we face, is that the way you think about water quality parameters in one part of the system is different than others. And so how do we even create a coherent response there?
And maybe I can just build on that briefly. When we're looking at transboundary agreements, it is quite different as well in what is considered an agreement and what's not. And sometimes it's defined by specific chemicals, sometimes it's family of chemicals, sometimes it's just the source or potential use, like anything that impacts fisheries. And so we do see that range of discussion, and it makes sense to some extent that it's tailored per basin and what really is the driving pressure in that basin and has political will to be addressed. But certainly it's not something we see consistently in the transboundary agreements. I don't know if Nina also wants to add.
I don't know if she can hear us.
I can hear you. I can add on that briefly. Okay, thank you. Yes, no, I mean, for the SDG 6.3.2 indicator, of course, which has been globally agreed, I mean, this has 5 core parameters that are measured, and these are things like dissolved oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, salinity. These are level 1 kind of, so the core parameters that are measured. And again, we are trying to look at level 2 reporting, which is more optional. These can be additional parameters and approaches. So for how to measure either the core parameters or other substances, but the core ones that we use in SDG 6.3.2 are these core 5: dissolved oxygen, electrical conductivity, nitrogen, phosphates, and pH.
And then maybe going to Ahmed's comment, obviously this is the challenge that, and why pollution is now being raised so high on the global agenda and being called one of the triple planetary crises, is that the resources to address this at very local levels all the way up to transboundary basin and source-to-sea system levels is just has not been there. And so certainly this is one of the reasons why we need to have these kinds of conversations, is to see how we can get more resources to address water quality degradation, because it influences so many other aspects of our lives and our development in terms of water scarcity, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of climate change, in terms of industrial and human water use, et cetera. And so it is a real core part of the health of the planet and our lives for us to address these issues of water quality.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, I couldn't agree more with Ruth, and I would strongly encourage that conversation continues with the participants in this room, outside of this room, and also is something we can bring into the panel a bit more as well. So I think it's a great comment and really nice framing for continued discussions beyond this room.
Okay, Nina, maybe you want a final last word? Or
Sure, just very, very, very quickly. Thank you. Yeah. So with regards to the second question, again, yes, it can be very expensive. I think this is largely pertaining to the in situ water quality monitoring. Again, we are looking at complementary methodologies. You will always need in situ data, but things like Earth observation, citizen science, again, there are, of course, resources needed for these, but they can provide a complementary means. for obtaining information on water quality, and that can also help open up the discussion and involve communities, for instance, in that monitoring. So how to sustain them? Yes, that's an important question, and I'd love to discuss that maybe after this session. Please do get in touch. And of course, yes, monitoring is the start. We need monitoring, but of course, key is then those solutions, and these can range from gray to green solutions, like nature-based solutions for water quality. So there's a range, but yeah, monitoring, of course, is the way to also monitor their efficiency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nina. And I saw a lot of nodding in the room, so I think we've answered the questions. With this, I think we come to the end of the first discussion. So thank you very much to our three speakers, Ruth, Alisa, and Nina online. And with this also, I will invite Diego Jara from IUCN to take the moderation role. And I think you should have a microphone somewhere, or you can maybe use one of them, I guess.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julien, and the participants, the key speakers that were in the previous section of this session. And now with this overview of the global challenges, the aspects of water cooperation, water quality, and also this source-to-sea approach at the general global level, it's very important to take into account what happens at the basin and regional level. And for this, we will have a panel with 5 experts from different regions of the world who are going to tell us best practices and some insights on how they have been managing water quality aspects, sources to sea, water cooperation from their different regions. For this, I would like to invite these 5 speakers. 4 of them are here in the room. One of them is online. I hope that she can hear us. So for this, I would like to invite Astrid Hillers, Senior Environmental Specialist at GEF, Birgit Vogel, Executive Secretary at ICPDR, the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River, Dr. Florence Grace Adongo, Executive Director of NBI and President of the African Network of Basin Organizations, Irina Makarenko, who is online. I hope that you can hear us, Irina. She is the Pollution Monitoring and Assessment Officer of the Commission on the Protection of the Black Sea Against Pollution, and my colleague Maria Laura Piñeros, Water Program Officer for South America in IUCN. First of all, I would like to make sure that Irina can listen to us. Irina, are you there? Are you online?
Yes,
Perfect.
Can you
Perfect.
hear me?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Irina. With this, based on these presentations that we had in the first part of this session, I would like to understand from your side, looking at your regions and your expertise, the practice that you have on the ground, what could be the benefits of looking in a cooperative manner the aspects of sources to sea, the connection of freshwater systems with coastal and marine systems, and what could be these benefits, and how other basins can learn from the best practices in your region. So first, perhaps Astrid.
All right, I'll get started. I start from the global and then it goes to the concrete. I think we've talked about this quite a bit already. So thank you for the previous presenters on the benefits and why the solution to pollution is not dilution, because pollution accumulates across the river and it happens in your own countries, and when you come to shared lakes and the coastal systems, you certainly feel it in your own country as much as you feel it downstream. So cooperation provides benefits, working on water quality provides benefits internally, cross-border, including to the coastal and marine ecosystems. Looking at a personal example, I mentioned it before, I'm from Germany, so I remember how the Rhine looked like when I was little, and I would have not swam in it, let alone, pick the fish out of it and try to eat it. So now you see this is totally changed. I was then over in actually also in the Elbe, I worked in Hamburg, where you see the eels with all these, growth on it and so forth. And this is 80s, we're talking, and born in the 60s, sorry. So this is a while ago. Same with Lake Constance, that was so polluted. Now, it's totally changed. These rivers have cleaned up, the lake has cleaned up. You see a bustling economy around it. There's restaurants, there's tourism, there's, activities around the river. You can fish in it, you can swim in it, and I have done it actually. I had to overcome the thing to go in there. So, and that is talking to what Ruth was saying, these benefits from water quality taken care of, they go upstream and they go across sectors, improving health. E. coli, diarrhea, is still one of the leading causes of death. So the health benefits in each country, not only downstream but in their own countries, is something that helps the economy and helps learning and helps education and it helps everything around it. Same, next is probably what we see in many countries is nutrient pollution. It is not only the pollution that comes into there, but it causes downstream and what it causes in your own countries, the hypoxia, the turbidity. We saw a picture, I think Alyssa had it up, from Lake Erie. Toxic algal blooms and, you shut down Toledo's water supply. And that is just recently, right, with the coming in. And the die-off of marine life that leads to, or a lake life, die-off and decrease in fisheries. So it has impacts on not only on health and so forth, but on food security upstream. So this is where the benefits travel upstream in country and regionally. So what do we need to do? There's also, of course, I don't want to forget also the benefits. We saw that right now in the COVID crisis. The opportunities for working together on analytics on water quality and notifying each other when something is showing up in the wastewater. We see right now spikes on COVID again, and it's detected in the wastewater. We have this another wave going up and all of that. Circularity, cleaner production, great opportunity there too. I think taking out water quality, the benefits from doing that is the pollution prevention. You have cleaner production, you have less pollution in the product that you produce, so you can recycle them, and you have less cleanup costs. So this is sort of the list of benefits, more of a general scale, and I'm sure Birgit can talk about much more in detail on the Danube and the Black Sea interconnection. Thank you.
Please, Birgit.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Astrid, for passing it on. And I want to say something in the beginning that I think is really important when we talk about monitoring, and that is there are no facts if there are no assessments for monitoring. And I think this relates very much to water quality and also water quantity assessment in all freshwaters, including the groundwater. That is very often somehow in the background, but of course very important, and also for the marine waters. And it also relates very much to the transboundary dimension that is automatically linked to it, so involving all the countries. So we are speaking source-to-sea, we are speaking of the basin-wide scale. That's complex, but I think we need to be aware that if we don't hold good facts, this can, and Susanne mentioned that, gave an indication on that in the beginning, this can lead to wrong assumptions. It can lead to wrong measures that actually don't improve the water quality situation, and it may also lead to political tensions, which of course we don't want, but it exists. So fact-based assessment and approaches are needed, and they usually lead to the contrary, what I just described, and they actually stand for functioning cooperation across borders. So this is a benefit. If we do monitoring, we do have information, and then we do have cooperation, and then things are moving to actually improve situations. And monitoring of water quality is at the core of transboundary cooperation in the Danube River Basin, and it was actually the first activity when the ICPDR got into place. The transnational monitoring network has been established under the Danube River Protection Convention and is in place now for 20 years, so quite a lot of experience of sharing information with 14 countries and actually basing all our assessments and reports on this basis. And I stop with answering this question now, and I guess I will get a bit more into examples a bit later.
Many things, very good. Dr. Adongo, if you can also let us know what the benefits from the African region could be, and specifically from the Nile.
Thank you very much. Cooperative water quality management is extremely important because to approve of any water resource, you have to know the quality and the quantity, and therefore target to the intended need. And therefore, it's known that water is never available if the quality does not meet the intended need. And therefore, water quality and knowing a lot about it and the characteristic of water is very important in terms of sharing information, especially at the basin level, and discussion, having dialogue and confidence building, and in a way that you can have joint actions together. In terms of ecology, the water quality determines the integrity of the ecosystem, and therefore it's extremely important that the ecosystem is maintained because it has natural functions, both to improve on the ecosystem but also to support our food chains. And a healthy food chain is very important for human beings and all living things. Reducing pollution cooperatively gives a stronger cooperative gist that can allow collective responsibility to be undertaken. Of course, it's very important. Water quality is linked to our public health, and it is also linked to sustainable management and development of the water, which is also linked to all our SDGs. So it's extremely important in a world where we are looking at looming scarcity that many transboundary water resources, that collective approach and holistic approach in the management of water resources is attended to. Politically, it can help us build trust among ourselves and confidence, and get to engage and learn from each other and see how best to manage the common water resources. And in the Nile Basin, I must say that most of the monitoring is still done at national level. The Nile Basin Initiative is just beginning to establish the regional water quality monitoring system. It is at the very prime stage, but we are looking at this because some of the pollutants travel very long distance, and they actually connect the Nile Basin to the seas and oceans. And therefore, we need to broaden the scope of stakeholder participation even beyond the basin, because the basin eventually feeds into the global circulation system through the oceans and seas. So that is what I can say for now.
Many thanks, Dr. Adongo. And now, Maria Laura, from your experience in South America, what could be these benefits from water quality, water cooperation, this sources-to-sea approach that can be shared to the globe?
Thank you for the invitation to this panel. I think I don't have anything new to add. There's been lots said about shared vision, but a shared vision among countries also means shared priorities and shared budget, so it's cost effective. There's also the source-to-sea approach, which led us to go away from the discussion of upstream being needed to take care for water and downstream being the beneficiary of clean water. And it takes us to a co-responsibility approach, which means it is beneficial for all of our basins. It is cross-sectoral. It raises multiple benefits. So we need to be co-responsible for the whole basin in this source-to-sea approach. There is also the trust building issue, right? And trust building leads to further cooperation. And further cooperation is needed because water is needed for everything. We need water for our health, we need water for our food, we need water for our energy, we need water for our economies. So this trust building among water is a good entry point. Environmental issues are a good entry point for trust building and building relationships for cooperation. And then there's also the reduced uncertainty of sharing data and models, and in climate change uncertainty, Sharing data makes decision making easier and more reliable. So I really don't think I have anything else to add. I have wonderful panelists with me, so that would be almost like a summary.
Many thanks, many thanks. And just to finish, let us hear also from Irina. Now that we discuss on what is the role, let's say, of institutions looking at freshwater, transboundary river basins, let us listen from you the perspective from an organization looking at marine ecosystems. Please, Irina, what could be these benefits from cooperation?
Thank you very much, Diego. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Really great pleasure and honor for me to join this particular session, to see so many familiar faces. It's really pity I couldn't make it to Stockholm this time. Also, thank you for giving me the floor, also to speak about the benefits of cooperation between the freshwater and marine ecosystems, and also overall for raising this important topic of water quality, because I'm sure, and it's very clear from what I heard already, that it's all being on the agenda of all the colleagues from this panel at very different levels. As it was mentioned, I represent the Marine Water Convention, the Black Sea Commission, which was created more than 25 years ago. And since then, we basically addressing all different types of pollution to the Black Sea. And since we were established, we have been collaborating with our Danube colleagues. So my warmest greetings to Birgit. Really sorry I couldn't see her in person. It could be really a good chance to discuss what we already made on the way, to ensure the source-to-sea collaboration in our, let's call it big LME basin. So it was mentioned already that our region is unique in terms of the river-to-sea interaction, but not only that, also in terms of political, in terms of economic cooperation, and also very diverse. And, meanwhile, the Black Sea itself was always very particular, was always isolated from the world ocean, was always having this unique ecosystem. It's being anoxic at some depths. We also have the Danube River, which is a huge river and is flowing through a huge number of European countries, which is, of course, undoubtedly having significant input to the Black Sea environment. And this is something that we are always eager to properly assess and mitigate. So that's why, as Birgit mentioned, monitoring is extremely important, but not only the monitoring, but also the harmonization of the monitoring. So since year 2000, I mentioned already, we have been implementing the Memorandum of Understanding with the ICPDR. But despite that collaboration, which is actually for more than 24 years now, it's just a couple of years ago that we really finally agreed on the concrete areas of collaboration. And also, because we are speaking now about the water quality, we sat down and agreed on the concrete water quality indicators, which we started to exchange since the year 2015. So we have annual reports which are being sent to each other, and we are able to assess the situation, because I mentioned that river-to-sea interaction is extremely important for us. We used to have a special joint technical working group which used to meet regularly, but it was interrupted because of pandemics. And then you all know that we are having the war in the region, so that's why the Joint Technical Working Group doesn't meet anymore. But I will tell you later today about what we are still managing to do. So as a regional sea convention, the Black Sea Commission is also collecting its own water quality parameters, and we do it under our so-called Black Sea Integrated Monitoring and Assessment Program. We also very well connected to the Mediterranean Sea. We also have some connection with Mediterranean Sea, and it makes us very much connected with other regional sea conventions, with European regional sea conventions, with other regional sea conventions in the universe, and it's also making us related to the European legislation and European directives, such as Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Water Framework Directive, and others. So you may also understand that it's not legally binding for all our Black Sea riparian countries, but still we have a very good level of interaction and harmonization. So our individual countries are making their best. We're also dealing with European regional seas, with global regional seas, with different organizations like UNEP, UNDP, UNESCO, regional fisheries bodies like GFCM and ACOBAMS agreement. We also part of different initiatives. And, as you may see, our large marine ecosystem and also the Danube basin, we have plenty of existing obligations. Of course, I couldn't name them all in a couple of minutes. And so we still have many ways to cooperate and to create synergies with. So to my opinion, I think it's the only way to further address the water quality, to address monitoring, and eventually to facilitate all the benefits that we are talking about today. And I'm not only speaking about the environmental one, but also the socioeconomic benefits, and also at the end of the day, political benefits.
Perfect. Many thanks, Irina. And now I would like to go with specific questions to our panelists to respond in 1 or 2 minutes, very specific aspects from your basins and regions. And I will start with Birgit. It was already mentioned an important aspect about data and exchange of data and information. And looking at the Danube with possibilities, with financial capacities from the countries that share, in this case, the Danube River Basin, how do you see the importance of data monitoring in the dynamics of water cooperation in the basin?
Yeah, thank you for this question, and I would like to again emphasize what I said earlier, that of course the monitoring is the basis of transboundary cooperation, and this is not only the case in the Danube. If I take the specific example of the Danube River Basin, we would also have to reflect on the history, how the ICPDR came into place when the Iron Curtain fell down and brought Eastern and Western Europe together. The will for cooperation was very much desired, but the water quality monitoring contributed to the dynamics of cooperation from the beginning. And here I want to emphasize, unusually, in comparison also to other basins, monitoring was actually the first activity the ICPDR, the Danube countries, were taking up. And although it is usually one of the more complex and difficult tasks to manage international basins, in the beginning of '85, we had 11 transboundary monitoring sites. Today, we have more than 100, and they are all aligned to the requirements of the WFD. There are still a few points I would like to say. Irina mentioned the cooperation we have together, so monitoring is the basis for it, and we are currently working together to adapt it to the source-to-sea approach. The transnational monitoring network in the Danube River Basin was developed under the convention, and I think this is something important to mention, that the quality assurance and the monitoring network actually brought along significant trust regarding the assessments, and this also increased the trust between the countries, and that was further enhanced with introducing the joint Danube surveys in 2001 that take place every 6 years. We sample, analyze, assess together, and we don't doubt the monitoring assessments, and I'm highly convinced that the more countries in a basin trust the monitoring assessment, the better the cooperation is working. And just to mention some examples, we use the monitoring to actually understand pollution. We do understand that organic pollution, we succeeded to reduce it by 60% since 2009, and we're able to actually trigger targeted investments in wastewater treatment. The Black Sea Commission and the pollution into the Black Sea, I'm really very proud to say that we, in our last assessments this year, we realized, we assessed and analyzed that we actually achieve the targeted measurements of the 1960s regarding the nitrogen and phosphorus loads, and now we will use the monitoring as well to actually see if this positive trend will continue. And of course, one point I would like to make that we should not only talk about water quality, we also need to monitor the water quantity. It's becoming more and more important, even in Europe, and I think we need to understand the effects of increasing drought events, low water levels, and water scarcity on the water quality as well. And with
Thank you very much, Birgit. And now going to you, Irina, and regarding the Black Sea, from your perspective, working on marine environments, what do you think should be done at the river basin level in order to protect coastal and marine ecosystems?
Thank you, Diego. I'm really confident that the water quality in the fresh systems should be managed somehow to maintain, of course, the quality of coastal and marine waters. And as Birgit mentioned, they already seen in the recent examples which demonstrated that the water quality in Danube and in the mouth entering into the Black Sea is really improving. And this is actually showing the efficiency of the measures which were taken by the individual countries, Danube countries, and also the Secretariat of the ICPDR itself. As Birgit said, I also think that monitoring is important. Of course, harmonization is important because we should speak the same language. Of course, we should eliminate the gaps and overlaps, but this is what we have been doing. I am just having very little time. I just wanted to proudly inform you that our recent achievement was the establishment of the initiative to strengthen the transboundary collaboration from source to sea in Danube River, Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea. So we managed to unite not only our efforts with Danube, but also with the Mediterranean Sea. And in May this year, although we started only last year, already in May this year, we met here in Istanbul for our first consultation meeting. So we had, we discussed a number of priorities, we shared all different actions taken, and we actually signed a document which is actually seeking for further exchange of information on the indicators, assessment methodologies, information about the diffuse sources of pollution, riverine inputs of litter. By the way, we have very good work now together with Danube and Mediterranean Sea. And also, of course, last but not least, the QAs, QCs, hotspots and modeling, which is again, as part of the monitoring, which is very timely now, and is also including both marine and riverine components. The last thing I wanted to mention, last year in Ukraine, we had an explosion of Kakhovka Dam, and we realized that there is really missing a component on the interaction between the riverine and marine pool of experts. So now we are working on that, and we are trying to establish a dedicated project to assess and to fight somehow with the consequences of this explosion. So I think we have, it's a high time for us to discuss this issue, to do something with this, and we are also actively participating in the Water Convention initiative, which was mentioned earlier this morning by Julian, also participate in activities of the action platform for S2S, which was presented by Ruth. So this is, I think that we have a nice ground for further cooperation. We have ground for the LME project, because we don't have any LMEs project in our basin. And we could deal there with the river-to-sea interaction, with the ecosystem approach application, biodiversity, fisheries, and, there are plenty of issues, of course, the climate change. And I think it's high time to improve our collaboration right now.
Thank you very much, Irina. And now, just to allow for short questions at one point during the session, if Dr. Adongo and Maria Laura just in very, very briefly can tell us, first for Dr. Adongo, what do you think should be key areas of work for river basin organizations to address emerging challenges such as pollutants, plastic pollution, and from your perspective of the impacts of the Nile, let's say, to the Mediterranean Sea?
Okay, thank you very much. I will talk mainly about plastics. And the plastics, we all know that is an industrially manufactured synthetic chemical, of course with various uses at different levels, which we all justify for. But it is also a very serious pollutant when it comes to microplastics that enters into the ecosystems and food chains which support man and living things in the world. And of course, with modernity, we are trying as much as possible to improve on plastics, but I think we are not doing adequately to safeguard the public health, ecosystem integrity in this area. And linear approaches are not working either. So cooperative management and indeed global management of plastics is required. And I think that it should be from plastic production itself, the manufacturers, the private sector, through the use and disposal. In other words, managing the whole life cycle of plastic is extremely important. Now, on a transboundary scale, there are many efforts that are being made, but as I've said, plastic pollution, especially microplastics, has now become a global problem as it moves from one basin to another. The Nile, the longest river in the world, crisscrosses about 11 countries. All these countries use plastics, and mechanisms of disposal and management is low. And it has been found that the Nile is fifth in position globally in discharging big quantities of plastics, between 100 and 1,000 tons of microplastics are discharged every year, which is equivalent of 140 to 100,000 tons of microplastic, macro. The plastics you are seeing and the ones you don't see is what I'm talking about. And these enter into the Mediterranean Sea. Now remember that the Nile Basin occupies 10% of Africa in terms of coverage, land coverage, and hosts a quarter of the population. So it's a dense populated area. And therefore, if nothing is done to manage these plastics, it will continue to affect the whole globe. So capacity to monitor is also very low right now. And there was a previous question where monitoring, especially in Africa, is really donor dependent and it's not sustainable. And therefore we feel that pollution should be reduced at source. The one who produces it knows how to remove it. And that person should be involved, or that institution should be involved. Instead of transferring costs to the users who are not able to manage the after-use materials of plastics. So I think in line with the UN Environment Assembly, I know that there are instruments that are being negotiated, and life cycle management is one of the areas that is being looked at to extend the producer's responsibility, not only to produce and sell, but also manage what is happening after the sale. So I think this is important. In NBI, we are just at the very beginning. With the support from GIZ, we did a pilot study to see the extent to which plastics are affecting the basin. Currently, we are doing some mapping to come out with action plan that we can coordinate the various activities in the basin to manage what is already in the environment. But I think the best way, even under the different international conventions, we need to grade plastics as one of those which is very dangerous in the environment once they reach the environment, and find a mechanism of managing plastics before they reach the environment. Perfect. So I think these are some of the areas. And of course, as a basin, coordinated monitoring and using structures and systems within the basin is important so that the countries can share the data, but also have a cooperative action plan that they can work on in order, but also look into how to sustain the consumption and production in a way that does not jeopardize the environment, and look into research and other innovative ways, including indigenous knowledge, so that we can tap local science that are friendly to the local environment. These are some of the
many thanks, Dr. Odongo, and I think this links very well with what Maria Laura has been mentioning in her previous intervention. And also for this, Maria Laura, I have a question for you. What is the role of these local communities, this data from citizens, data from the locals, indigenous people, in order to inform water quality processes, transboundary water negotiations?
Thank you, Diego, for that question. We at IUCN South America have the pleasure to have been working with local communities to monitor and to perform citizen science for water quality monitoring. Local communities being indigenous people, indigenous women, being civil societies, being NGOs, and non-state actors have the ability to reach agreements for water monitoring faster than they do, than the states do, because there is no geopolitical or historical weight behind them. This is very important not only for, yeah, you changed it early. Can you go back, please? Oh, sorry. So, as I was saying, non-state actors have the ability to reach water cooperation agreements and water quality monitoring easier and faster than states because there's no geopolitical or historical grievances between them before. And this is important not only for them because this back up their social claims, but it also completes databases when it can be included into national data. Citizen science can complete national databases. They've also asked me to address some of the better practices, and those are that it should be science. It means that we need to train local communities into easy, understandable on-field monitoring techniques that are quite easily done. There's portable field. But we also should acknowledge local knowledge because they know a lot about their ecosystem. They know about microinvertebrates. They know where their animals can drink water. They know where they can wash their dishes. They know where they can gather water for their own needs. So these water issues are very known to them and they manage water locally, but then we should back up their claims by making them recognizable practical science into those. And there's other things about the sustainability of the citizen science monitoring experiences that relies on operational costs. They are expensive. So it is not just one-way intervention of gathering them the pH meter or getting them you get them the meter, but then you also need to get them the reactive papers and all of the chemicals and things that are needed to keep on monitoring. And as the gentleman in the room has said, once the project is done, there is no more monitoring because there is no ownership of those processes. But I think, and now Diego, you can switch it to the next one, please. I think there is one more important thing that we need to issue when addressing citizen science, and that is we also need to build capacity for political influence. It is not just the capacity to scientifically monitor the water, the quality of the water, but it's also the way that they can champion their way into political decisions that can be uptaken up to better, to higher levels of decision making, like municipalities, districts, and even national levels. I know we're short on time, so.
Thank you very much, Maria Laura. And now I would like to go to you, Astrid. Do you think that the level, like what we have been seeing, the level of water cooperation is robust enough in order to address these global challenges? Do you think that we are ready for that? And what could be your recommendations looking at the global perspective on how to address these challenges? Please.
That's like an easy question, right? Well, let's solve that all. I think there's lots of action needs, and I mean I'll start with one we judged in the previous section is the storytelling and the quantification and communication of the benefits from water quality treatment. You have to put it in economic terms and to policymakers' terms. What benefits are there to health, to income, to not missing school days, to food security, and environment integrity, what is the economical benefits that I get, and how can I equate that with the investments that need to happen? I don't think we are telling that good enough. We are also not telling good enough the economical impact of biodiversity loss that comes partly from quantity and quality degradation. That needs to be coming out much more clearly to make a case for addressing water quality. Strong national and local institutions. We need to strengthen on national level what is going on, but often, even if regulations are good on national level, they're not matched by the capacities of countries, of many, many countries, to actually measure these wonderful standards that we import from somewhere else around the world. There's not the capacity to take proper samples, to preserve them, to bring them in a lab, or to fly them to another lab, to look at persistent pollutants, to look at heavy metals, to look at all the chlorinateds and so forth. So this non-match of what needs to happen in regulation and the capacity to do so is certainly one gap. And maybe I'll just add two more, because three is always a good one. We do need to invest in reference labs and the capacities to actually even monitor and measure difficult parameters that accumulate. Second is surface and groundwater interaction. Groundwater is the source of half of the drinking water, globally speaking, 40% of irrigation water, 20% of industry. Yet we find more and more pollution in the groundwater sources. We do need to have better regulation there, and we need to prevent the pollution to happen. You cannot clean this up. This is just simply too expensive, so you need to look at zoning and keeping things out of the groundwater. And even in the Danube, I looked at the Danube survey the last time, you find pharmaceuticals and so forth in more and more groundwater samples. Is that a threat? Yes, and you look at antimicrobial resistance, this is a long word, that will have huge impact on humanity, and you cannot stop this. So we do need to act on groundwater quality issues. And the third, we talked a lot about source-to-sea, and there's pollution, it goes downstream, it goes into the lakes, it goes in the sea. We are missing to backcast, what does it actually mean? What does need to happen on the land base when we find such and such pollution levels in the ocean? You need to backcast who has to invest and how much, and is it even realistic? And a lot of times we see, what has to happen in agriculture, for example, on land, is very ambitious in order to cut down on the nutrient pollution and the hypoxia. So while we talk a lot about plastics these days, and which is a very big problem, I wished it would use that momentum to look at the broader other water quality issues, and especially those that bioaccumulate. And we will find in the oceans, in the marine life, in the food chains, and so forth, and we find in groundwater. So last word there is, I think the good old solution to pollution is certainly not dilution, it's prevention. Even if we can't measure it, we can do an educated guess what is in pollution sources. We can work on zoning. We can make industries responsible for at-the-source treatment, as you said. So we need to step up on that one. And I think RBOs have a good role to play there, while we have a lot of them in the room, to get actors together, get sectors together, and have these difficult conversations on how can we regulate and how can we put better systems into place, and incentivize these investments that you need to have. And maybe you can even get downstream to upstream investments to protect the watershed with nature-based solutions or others to keep some certain, you cannot keep everything out, but certain pollution out of the system. Thank you.
Many thanks, Astrid, and many thanks for your patience for questions and answers. We are a little bit late in our session. However, I would like to have just a couple of questions from the audience. If possible, there is something very concrete that you would like to ask any of our panelists, I would like to welcome that, and so that our panelists also just can respond very briefly. So if there are a couple of questions perhaps from the audience that we can address. Well, I think that, yes, please. With a mic.
Sure. Mary Matthews, UNDP Water Lead. Happy to see everybody here, and thank you all so much for this. Quick question, and this sort of follows up on what Astrid as well as everyone else has been saying about water quality monitoring. Can you just say a couple of things about using biomonitoring with macroinvertebrates as a relatively low-cost way to do that and the impacts of that? I know with groundwater that's a little more tricky, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Is that quick enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. And just for the time, I'm not sure if we have anything from our online audience. Perhaps if there is just one thing, please.
How do your organizations share all of the water quality data, especially when you're cooperating across the Danube and the Black Sea?
Perfect. And well, let's, because just for the sake of time, and we can also reconnect with the panelists. You have the links of all of our participants here, so we can continue discussing, and we will have a whole week to discuss about these issues. If very briefly you can mention something about this question, each one of you, but really one sentence, a couple of things that you would like to conclude.
I only say something to the first one. The second one is over to the Danube and to the Black Sea. Biomonitoring, of course, biomarkers. We all grew up with the Saprobian index, whatever that is in English, but looking at little critters in the water and referring back to what the water quality is. It's a very appropriate and good way of quick water monitoring. It's still very much used also in the field. Lots of school programs are even running to have citizen science and upstream reporting. There's now, of course, you go now, leap and fade forwards where we get eDNA, which also is very easy to sample, but you have to send it in, but it's incredibly powerful to get a better idea of water quality and biodiversity in the freshwater system. So I think great tool, and certainly doesn't cost us much money.
Perhaps Birgit and Dr. Adongo, because this online question was mostly related to river basin organizations, to institutions, if you could have something very short on that.
Yeah, the second question, can you repeat it again?
Yeah, when you're cooperating around water quality data, how do you publicize that cooperation, specifically around cooperation across the Danube?
Okay. I mean, working with the Black Sea Commission, we do have a report that we share yearly, and that's available. So that's how we do it. We do have a monitoring site at Rainy that has been shifted because of the war a little bit downstream. So we have a clear agreement how that is being shared. Plus, we had the joint technical group where we used to exchange. And the first question as well, I mean, we've been always monitoring the biological quality elements because we have to, because of the Water Framework Directive. It is time consumptive and expensive, but because of this, we are doing more work, substantive work on eDNA within the joint Danube surveys, where we also compare our factual sample data with the eDNA, and I think this has really a real significant potential for the future, reducing costs as well, but it needs to be validated.
Many thanks. I have been informed that because of the time, we have to conclude the panel, but please, colleagues, just make sure that you connect with our panelists, with our other speakers, so we can continue discussing on these aspects. Thank you very much to our panelists. Please, if you can give them your gratitude for the participation. And now I would like to hand it over to Malte Grossman from GIZ with a vast experience in the Horn of Africa, who is going to give us some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good morning. Thank you, everyone. This was a fantastic discussion, very interesting and broad. And on behalf of the conveners, I've been asked to kind of see if I can wrap up the session. So we set out to answer like 3 questions. Now, what are the benefits of transboundary cooperation in terms of managing water quality from source to sea? And we've heard a lot of examples of this. There's a lot of evidence around there of the benefits, both in terms of the managing the marine realm, but managing water quality along the trajectory, and the evidence needs to be brought out more clearly. I think we heard that it also needs to be brought out in economic terms and making the case for action, but the evidence is there. Now, the second question was really what is the state of transboundary cooperation on quality, and where are the gaps? And we heard a lot of evidence that cooperation around water quality has been at the foundation of a lot of cooperation processes, that a lot of agreements in the world do incorporate water quality, but that there's obviously a trajectory from, let me say, levels of ambition that are set out and towards, let me say, the mechanisms of implementation that are in place. And we do see a whole continuum across the different entities, the different RBOs, in terms of working on this continuum. And obviously there are some examples, classical examples of a lot of success in cleaning up rivers, for example, in Europe. And there are other examples, maybe more from now the developing world, where water quality is on the agenda, but it is not yet fully formalized in terms of the mechanisms. And that leads me then really to the third question, is in terms of what are the enabling factors that need to be strengthened to incorporate water quality, or to address water quality in terms of water cooperation. And we've really heard quite a lot of good examples, and I think we're in transboundary session, so again we can use that useful framework of looking at institutions, information, or let me say joint understanding and investments. We've talked a lot about monitoring and assessment. Understanding was very interesting to hear, obviously, that we have emerging contamination issues, plastics, other toxic substances compared to the more traditional ones. So that's an emerging topic. We've also seen that there's a whole range of monitoring that can be deployed by countries, ranging from the classical in situ, but also to Earth observation, especially citizen science. And I think here in some countries is also just the common sense knowledge, understanding of hotspots that might need to be leveraged to guide action. So that was one of the areas I think that came out of the discussion, that there's a need to look into how to push forward these different monitoring approaches. Now, on the institutional side, yes, it did come out very clear that governance from source to sea is like fragmented, and there's a discussion of who needs to be at the table. One of the questions was also how do marine, let me say, bodies who manage the lower part of the basin and bodies who manage the river, how do they come together? What actors need to be at the table? Civil society, government, cross sectors. How can these different perspectives be brought into the decision-making process? So we heard some examples there, but it's also an area of further discussion. Now, when we look at the third topic of investments, as mobilizing funds for all of this, we did have some discussion around the topic of how to fund monitoring, and that is quite expensive, but it's important because it is at the heart of many of the cooperation processes. And we didn't have as much discussion, let me say, on leveraging investments into cleaning up water quality. But there were some interesting pointers. I mean, we do have many cases where there's a lot of resources have been invested, but it was also pointed out, you need to look at the issues of how can there be maybe least cost trajectories of sharing costs, but also of sharing benefits across the basin, looking where do the benefits accrue? Do they accrue downstream, upstream? Which way do these benefits flow? Who would be bearing the cost of these investments to clean up, or do these cleanups actually need to be prevented at the source in terms of also looking at regulation, looking at standardization, and maybe also discussing about, that actually touches on an issue that we also didn't discuss maybe as much as how do all of the riparians from upstream, downstream actually come together, not only to monitor, but also to set objectives in terms of, let me say, quality standards of the marine ream, of the river itself, which is also another side of coming together to understand that need for action. So I think there were really a lot of very interesting points in this discussion. From my end, I would also like to appreciate one more time everyone who's been part of this. So that is the panelists, the keynote speakers, the moderators, and I think especially Alisa, I don't know where she is, who's been organizing all of the session, and all of you participants. And having said that, it's the beginning of Stockholm Water Week, so let's have a lot of quality discussions on water in a transboundary international setting throughout the week. Thank you very much.